for a few days, but then I've got to go to the US,
All right.
Mumbai,
Oh my God.
then back
Okay. Geez, the next few weeks.
here next few weeks.
Full of traveling.
Cultural diversity.
Oh, at its core.
And it's cool.
Good morning, Dawncast. Welcome to another series of our podcast. We've got Paul McLean this morning with us from Palo Alto, but also from Dreams for Life. I met Paul about a month ago. We connected via LinkedIn. You know, one of those this day and age. You know how we connect with people globally through various social media platforms. But you know, when I reached out to Paul and when we start talking about inclusion and diversity, I felt that Paul has such an amazing story to share, and I couldn't wait to get him onto our podcast. And I'm really thrilled that, you know, he has lived, he will tell you later, but he currently lives in Indonesia, and you know, he's just got back to here and yesterday, and so, you know, I'm really grateful to have you this morning with us.
Sure.
On our podcast, Paul.
Great.
So let's launch into it, I suppose.
Yeah, sure.
And talk about, you know, you thank you for accepting to LinkedIn.
Sure.
Tell me what what got you to say, okay, I'll accept this woman to LinkedIn and on LinkedIn.
Yeah, good question. Well, I think it's sort of like anything. You know, if I look at the connections I've built over, I think I was one of the first people who took up LinkedIn just as a way of connecting with C-level people, you know, being a salesperson many years ago. And I think I'm always looking for different people. And that's probably part of because of my journey in life, you know, being brought up in Australia, but then spending a lot of time the last 15 years in Asia. And it's just given me a different perspective on life, very different perspective. So reaching out, different people, different cultures. And I think probably the place in life that I'm at, you know, you look for different people at those different points in time as well.
You said, I mean, you were born and brought up Aussie,
yeah.
You know,
Yep.
Aussie, oi, oi, oi.
Yeah.
So you decided 15 years ago to leave Australia.
Yeah.
What, I suppose that would have been related to work?
Yeah, it was related to work. I was working for a US company. I was running their business in Australia and New Zealand, technology company, and they pretty much sold to an Australian entity. But their global business, they sold to an American telecommunication company. They were in Singapore, and they called me and said, hey, you ran this. We don't know what we have. Would you come on a 12-month contract to Singapore? So that's how I landed in Asia. Went for 12 months. I think it's a famous story. I talked to every sort of expat over there. I came here for a few months or 12 months, and I've been here many years later.
What was that first foray into Asia like? Was it the first time for you to you know, work in Asia?
Yeah, it was first time. I've done some trips, but yeah, as far as really being embedded there.
What was it like?
It was a real challenge, I've got to say. I can recall the first presentation I gave was in Singapore, and I had a room of about 100 people. I did my presentation, and I had my PA there, and I said to her, so, you know, how did it go? She said, well, actually, when you introduce yourself, no problem. After that, they didn't understand a word you said. So I think it was my Australian accent, and I spoke too quickly. Right. So they couldn't pick up a lot of the things. So that's a bit of a famous story. So I then decided, right, I'm going to slow everything down. And now people say, are you Australian, English, or American? So I sort of get that as a result of that.
But how did you find out that they didn't get anything? I mean, beside the PA telling you, how did she get that understanding?
Oh, you know? Just discussions afterwards. But she was looking at their faces in the room, and then they started talking to each other. What's this guy actually talking about? So I think they had slides to look at, so it wasn't that bad. But
so were you the white guy in the bedroom? Bedroom. Sorry, cut that out. Were you the white guy? Were you the white guy in the boardroom?
Yeah, white guy in the boardroom, and you know, I think that's one of the sort of challenging things is for the white guy in those environments. There's a level of expectation that I'm going to listen to this guy because he's more experienced or something like that, and I just had no belief in that, and I still don't have a belief in that because I think it's what people are exposed to and what other people are willing to expose others with that gives them opportunity. I think everybody can be as good as anybody else if they're given that opportunity. Yeah.
So 12 months in Singapore, what else did you understand or what did you learn from working in that environment and being a white Anglo male?
Yeah. I
in a
think,
senior role?
Yeah, senior role. I had a team at that point working for me. So I had, we were predominantly Chinese Singaporean, quite sort of, I suppose, submissive in their nature. Singapore's a very education-based society. Probably lacking in social skills compared to other countries and even other Asian countries. So,
what do you mean by lacking social skills?
Well, because they're so focused on education. If you look at an Australian world, children, even when they're coming out of school, they've got a part-time job and things like that. In Singapore, it's very much, no, you keep following the education process. So they're not so much getting the social activity and interactions that other societies get. So they're very much focused on work ethic, the hours of work. They could be working until 8 p.m. just to get the job done. They have a feeling they've got to be sitting there because the boss is still there, that sort of pressure. So I think with that team in particular, over the course of 2 years, they really changed because of just the nature of how I work. So I did things like we did role plays, put them in front of a camera, and said, let's see who you really are and what your capabilities are. And in fact, my PA, who was just doing scheduling and things like that, she came out as probably the best customer interaction person we had in the team. So that's what started to get me realizing that people have these capabilities. If you just give them opportunity, you can really sort of expose that. Yeah.
But do you think that, say, you seem to have that mindset of wanting to recognize people's abilities or capabilities beyond what they present themselves? What is that due to, do you think, from that kind of mindset?
If I think about, my career, so I moved around a lot. I think I went through phases where, I'd have people saying, Paul, that resume, 2 years here, 1 year here, it doesn't look good. But if I look back, I sort of don't subscribe to it, and I never have. I was always looking for, as a person, as an individual, I wanted to keep growing. So, I went into like electronic radio trades, and then I got into graphic arts. And so I was an apprentice in graphic arts. And then I decided, I want to sell these services. So I went into selling for graphic arts companies, and I went for Canon and Xerox. And all of those steps just kept adding things onto, knowledge and capabilities. And I think I've always been part of my nature. I think being brought up, and my parents just always been someone who is caring about others. So I thought it is just silly having the knowledge in my head. Yeah, because I'm bald now, right? So
yeah, that's all the knowledge.
Yeah. It's just all gone.
Wisdom. It kind of you're supposed to kind of strip to the bare.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So, but yeah, I've always had that mindset of it's pointless if it's just sitting in my head, and both with my children, and then everyone who I started to associate with, I think that's how I sort of evolved. I wanted to keep helping people. And for me to see them make that step is just so rewarding, to see, other people be able to accept it and then, move forward with their lives is fantastic.
You said your parents, you got this obviously conscious or conscience due to obviously your upbringing. Can you give us a little bit of, peep into it, what it was like for Paul McLean, little Paul McLean, growing up here in Australia?
I look at my parents and they were, I think they had an open mindset, even in that era where things were still, I think, parents wanted kids to be very structured and, I really want you to do this. But never once did they say, I want you to go to university or I think you should, so therefore I don't think that's a good idea. They always let me work out where that next step needed to be and supported me. And I think that was the foundation where, if you get that, then of course you can see the results of it, right?
So where did you grow up in Sydney?
No, in Melbourne.
In Melbourne.
And so Melbourne, born in Box Hill and eastern suburbs of Melbourne, brought up there with my sister, and my sister was very academically inclined. So she went to the high school, I went to the technical school. And she went on and did applied biology and all of that. And I always said, university, I'm not interested in that. I love getting my hands dirty. I love technical things. So my parents, just provided, whether my sister had that path or I had this, it was very much, all right, what do we need to do to support that? So that, that's important. Being able to be with family and then have that support network to chase those dreams, I think at that point, maybe they're not real dreams, you know what I mean? But
so you didn't have a career mapped out, like you didn't have kind of, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to be.
Yeah, I think no, I don't think I did, because I sort of chopped and changed a little bit. But I think when I got into the sales side, I was, like a successful salesperson. I'm thinking, wow, man, the world's endless. I can make money. I can be a C-level. I can be a CEO. I absolutely went through that phase. I wanted to run my own company, and I think that was probably, I was very immature on that front, on business acumen and things like that. And sort of back to your point you mentioned before, when I landed in Singapore, one of the big cultural problems I faced was I was running a business on the side, which was from my past, and it was developing, there's the WAP sites for music artists. You remember WAP on mobile phone, right? So I developed this concept, which was to, if you like, outsource the WAP portal. So we would host it, and then people like Sony Music would come in and do the Michael Jackson website. So I hooked up with a business partner in Singapore and got ripped off $30,000 US. Oh
my God.
And it was...
It's the startup, the entrepreneur.
The entrepreneur startup. So I hit a wall very, very quickly. And that was, if I think back, that was a lot to do with me absolutely not so much understanding, but not taking into account understanding Asia, how people work, how people don't work, and seeing through these things. In hindsight, I should have done it totally differently, but didn't pay enough attention to it. And
did it impact your trust in doing business in Asia there?
Yeah, it did. It did, I think, but I think it made me just more aware, of the things that I needed to consider. And I think that's probably part of my upbringing, was to look at, you've sort of got to go through life. You've got to take some of these risks in order to realize, okay, I'm not going to do it that way again, but doesn't mean I'm not going to do it again. And then so many years on, you start to evolve. So I think it made me cautious, because my roles were very Asia Pacific focused, and they still are. So it's an exciting, I call it like the third dimension. It's a bit like you get off a plane and on a plane, and I'm in India and in Mumbai, and then I'm in Shanghai. I don't know any other languages, by the way. So I've gotten by with not knowing any other languages, but I've had this ability to sort of just understand and see body language of how people are reacting to situations, and then try and bring them into the fold.
a lot of our followers and listeners to Dawncast are a lot of them are startups. A lot of them are also working across cultures and borders. I just want to go back to that experience that you had when you said that you started that business. If you can give the details of the business, but what were the mistakes, or what were the lessons? I wouldn't call it mistakes. I don't think we make mistakes. I think we learn from a lot of these lessons that life kind of tend to throw at us every now and then.
Yep.
Can you give it a more, I suppose, a chronological explanation and structure, and so that those who are listening can actually, who are on that path or in the middle of that journey, can understand what they can do or how they can improve what they're doing?
Yeah, sure. I think you can never underestimate probably the planning, phase. And, as entrepreneurs, I think we're always keen to be able to get there quickly. We have probably a lot more belief in what this outcome's going to be. We're excited about it. And I think it's the balance between emotions and logical thinking. And that's sort of the biggest lesson I got was I was so emotional when I went through that roller coaster that I didn't even think clearly. I was actually thinking of, if I can do that quickly, then I could get this. And I could get the contract with Sony Music, and I could get this, and I could get this. So you actually let a lot of the detail disappear. So I think, part of my suggestion would be, you need to surround yourself with probably more people. Realize where you're good, but also realize where your gaps are, and plug those gaps with people who can advise or support, that insight that you need as part of that journey. I think that's the powerful message that I would give. If you look at people, you can't do these things on your own. And you, as you well know.
Yes. I'm learning that, or I have learned a huge lesson in that sense. Sometimes we come up with an idea, you think it's my idea, and therefore, I've got to drive this and not share it. I think that we're moving into, I suppose, a sharing economy, a marketplace whereby really you need to focus on what your strengths are,
right,
what your key strengths are, and then, as you said, plug in where you believe, and I suppose be prepared to fail. Were you prepared to fail, or you didn't even know, and that's why it has such a huge impact?
Yeah, I don't think I was prepared to fail. I think part of it was, I'd landed in a foreign country, and I was thinking, this is great. And I remember, and I cannot remember the name of the book, but someone who I had worked with in Australia had said, you should read this book. It's about doing business in Asia. And I still to this day remember him telling me that I should read the book, but I didn't read the book.
So the advice is have to read a book, that kind of books?
Yeah, but it was, when I did read excerpts of the book, it actually helped you with that sort of understanding. You've got to understand that culturally, where you might see this as almost like an illegal practice, it's actually a cultural difference. And I think that's part of what people maybe just don't quite understand. If you're staying in Australia and then you go on a holiday, you get a very, very small snippet of what that culture is. But if you live there, if you start a business there, I think it's very challenging. Same for, people coming into Australia and then, taking a startup mentality. But if you can balance emotion with logic, and the logic comes from that inclusion of other people, and you being able to listen to them, not for the sake of it, but to listen to understand, that is I think a critical, chemistry that you need to have to be successful.
I thought men are not supposed to be emotional.
Well, I got in touch with my feminine side very early.
Oh, did you? Excellent. We'll come back to that topic. So after 12 months in Singapore, obviously, whatever the experience you've had, the kind of the the hurdle that you experienced with your own business, it still must have been so good that you continue to stay there for the next 15 years.
Yeah. I think, I mean, it was, of course, a financial impact, but I'm a little bit of the internal optimist, I think. So
Eternal optimist or internal optimist?
I think a bit of both. But again, it went back to my family. I played a lot of sport. I played competitive tennis when I was younger, and sport, as you know, in Australia is so huge.
Yes, right.
But that competitive element, being in the sales environment, working for those organisations who are also great training companies. They invest a lot in their people to be able to give them the confidence. So I think that helped me move past that. But as I said, I was very wary when I then got on the plane and got off the plane. Even working in cultures like Korea and China, which language-wise are very, very difficult. So I was often presenting and coaching people with an interpreter. And then you've got to start considering, okay, I need that interpreter to, that's actually going to take me double the amount of time to do this delivery as opposed to, doing it in English. But all of these experiences just allowed me to, I think, understand a far more diverse range of people, but also, I think, more critically understand that they've all got the capability. It's just some people are shut out because of, who they are, the colour they are, where they're from. But, I've just seen some amazing experiences, just by giving people the opportunity.
I mean, we through Dawn, we do connect with a lot of people that are doing business in Asia. And one of the, I suppose, the issues, or not, there are many issues, but some of the things that they've identified is obviously language, as you've said. You seem to have the patience in order to build that into your work, say presentation, or when you go, to a meeting. So, what are some of the tips? Do you think? How can people make that as part of their own being in working in that environment? Because you sound like you have kind of made that you.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's necessarily everybody's cup of tea.
So I think one of the biggest things is believing in what you're talking about. And I went down I made a lot of mistakes, and a lot of those were overthinking things. And when you do that, you sort of infill things with a lot of what I call noise.
I keep on saying we've got a committee of voices in our head.
Yeah. And then you sort of, it does get you off track. So if you're given a task to present on a certain topic, or even sort of write a business plan, again, I think it's part of that emotional thing as to what would I like to do versus what's actually really required here. And I think some of the mistakes I made was actually not going back and checking. So if you were saying, Paul, I'd like you to present on this, I would take a bunch of assumptions away and put something together and present. And you would sit there and go, oh, it sort of wasn't what I was after. Good effort, but... So I think it's about, the level of communication is really important. And it sort of gets back to having the voice, right? I think for me, I would always be asking and checking, sort of saying, okay, so you told me this. Is this what you're looking for? Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay, I'm pretty clear on that. And once you've got a level of focus, then you're building something that is more logical rather than emotional, to my point before, right? So I think that's the key.
What about if you come across, I'm sure you have, but what if you come across cultures that would just agree if you come back to them and say, look, is this what you're after? And they said yes. And have you experienced that whereby you thought, because you're so consultative, you go back to them, you check, but their culture is they're agreeing without actually trying to offend you, then that you come out with something that's completely different to what they expect? Okay.
Yeah. So
Is there an example of that?
I've absolutely learnt by that. So a large part of my life's been coaching people of all walks of life. And sometimes you get the language thing where they're sitting in a room and you can sort of see, I'm sort of understanding this guy, but I'm sort of not. And so you have to take, an individual approach to people, very much so. So some people say, oh, if I'm in China, it's different. But actually, in front of every person, it's different because everybody's different. And it's about awarding yourself the time to make sure and sort of check. So, yeah, I've often got, whether I'm interviewing people or whether they're sitting in a coaching session, you're right. If they're responding sort of quickly, my first reaction is, hang on a minute, I don't think they understand what I mean. Do you really understand what I mean? Give me an example of what you think I'm talking about. And then you can pretty quickly see, oh, I'm thinking this. No, actually, let's go through this again and then sort of guide them through the process. Yeah.
Do you find that being an Anglo male, that there is a reverence and that's more of kind of people are more fearful of you, say, working in the Asia Pacific area, and that's that impede in the way that you work with people?
I think it did initially, whether it was with my team when I started in Asia, there was definitely that, oh my God, I've never worked for an Anglo male guy. You could see it. It was like fear in their eyes, very hesitant to even approach you. So
how did that make you feel? How did that?
It's awkward. Yeah, and I think that's where you start to see both sides of the coin. I was sitting there thinking, wow, how am I going to get these people to develop, as individuals, as part of a team, if I'm running this group and I've got Chinese Singaporeans all the way around me, and I had, a different group of people, their different capabilities, different ideas. I had one guy who was the self-proclaimed expert in presentations who, we found out just talked too much. So I sat down with him and I said, listen, mate, you're just talking way too much. When a customer comes in, it's about the customer, not you, right? So I want you to start listening. So we started teaching him listening techniques. I had another guy who was very analytical and took the information that he'd heard and presented it, but was terrible at presenting. So we worked on how he would present, as well. So you end up with both ends of the spectrum and you're trying to work out, okay, how do I actually do that? But I think the element of, and I still see it today, and I don't like it. I don't like the fact that I would walk into the room and the room hushes, because it's a white guy and he's not Asian and, I've got to listen to this guy. So very quickly, I come to their level. And when I coach people, I'm all about them. So to make them very comfortable from the first second, I don't talk about me. I don't talk about the business or anything. It's about, so how are you going? What's going on with you? Talking about their family and things like that. And I've coached managers on being human. Don't manage the number. There is a person here who is helping you. Understand them far better than what you do, and you can actually they can grow and also you can grow. Yeah.
But do you think, that sounds really, you've applied it, but if you're looking at global companies whereby there are deadlines to be met, there are, money to be made, how do you think for their employees or their customers, for them to spend that time, because that is about time, isn't it, that you have to put in order to understand that person, to kind of say, how are you, what's your business, how's your business going, etc.
Yeah, but that's what it requires. We had a discussion about inclusion and diversity, right? And and I think one of the things that you had mentioned to me, which has actually in the last number of weeks really sort of got me thinking, is the inclusive bit, right? Is there is actually not a lot of time spent on the inclusive element, which is not just saying, "Hey, Dawn, what's your opinion?" But it's also giving these people an environment that they're comfortable, where their voice can be heard, and they can actually grow as a result of that. They're not criticised, they're not shut down. And I think business owners, from the CEO all the way down, that's where the culture starts, and it flows down from there. And they've got to start thinking about the people that work for them, from the admin worker to the CFO and then everybody else. Every one of those people has a capability far greater than what they're probably doing today, because they're very much role defined. So I think the future successful workforce and I think personal growth is about that, is taking some time to address and understand these people far better. And I think HR should play a bigger role in that. It's not just about recruitment and the policies. It's also about setting the tone.
HR has a long way to go, I think, in terms of that space.
Yeah.
You mentioned before that you played competitive sport.
Yep.
Australia is quite competitive when we come.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that basing yourself in Asia, do you identify there is a competitive culture within the Asia Pacific region? I mean, I know that there's somebody who's looking at the competitiveness of culture and the West and the East.
Yeah, I think there is, but I don't. It's not as prevalent. I mean, if I looked at Victoria and New South Wales,
we're very competitive.
So, and growing up in Victoria, I was, and in work, we had the sales team from Victoria would always be head to head against the New South Wales guys, right?
Yeah.
So it was like the southern states were all cool with each other, and as you go north, of course we were called the Mexicans because we were south of the New South Wales border, right? So, I think the challenge in Asia is I think they're far more insular as a country. I think there's competitiveness. There's competitiveness there, but it's not to that sort of level. And I've got to say, I think sport has a big factor in that, a huge factor in that. I think Australia is so diverse from that region. I think that's why people are attracted to it somewhat, because it breeds conversation, it breeds, it breeds arguments, but also it breeds
hooligans in the sporting field. So 15 years. So what did you do after Singapore? Where did you go to? What's your next stage in that career development?
So I had an opportunity through a CSR program, through an employer, whilst I was still in Singapore.
Corporate Social Responsibility Program.
Yeah, corporate social, sorry. And they were doing a lot of work with We See Hope, which is a big UK-based charity organisation. And they work with lots of sort of partner groups around the world, but very focused in Africa. So we had an opportunity for employees to go as a group to Uganda. And that was just the biggest life-changing moment for me. Because here's an aspirational person who's probably still thinking about, maybe would I go into senior management and things like that. And within 24 hours of landing in Uganda, I was a different person.
Wow.
I sat there and I looked at a girl talking to me about educating adults on how to treat children. And these child rights groups that they had built in the schools, there were signs up, no underage sex with girls. So they were literally marketing this as a movement. Yeah, so they would be looking at going to church groups on weekends, and they would use songs and poetry. They built these messages around how you would treat children. and it wasn't just that, but it was that cultural African, that singing and dancing. And so they would then perform these songs and poetry for us. And it just blew me away. I'd arranged with a group of friends that I would take some soccer balls and basketballs and skipping ropes. And they had not seen any of these things. Their soccer ball was 4 plastic bottles taped together. And so...
When was this? What year was this?
This was in 2016, thereabouts.
God, really?
Yeah. So it was just, it was mind-blowing. And the way they were recounting their, them growing up. Also, though, I think the way women are treated, I often saw, more times than not, the woman with carrying the huge container of water, kilometres. We're talking, some are walking 10 kilometres to the water hole, 10 kilometres back with a full container or 2. There were more men riding bikes than there were women, and it was just, I was thinking, wow, I feel like I've gone back 30 years, but this is today. So I think that for me was such a life-changing moment. I remember sitting on the plane coming back and thinking, am I going to go back to, Africa and do this, or what am I going to do? So it just started me thinking about what was going to be my next phase of my life. And I literally pretty much stopped looking at the aspirational piece of myself and started looking at how could I help people? And as part of my role as a coach for many years, I'm sort of helping people. So it seemed like a natural progression to do that. So yeah, it led me down that path to think about, well, what was the next step?
So what was the next step when you got back to, by that stage you were in Indonesia?
No, so I was still in Singapore at that stage. And I decided that I'd had a lot of friends in Indonesia. It was really interesting to sort of go, I need time out. So I actually flew to Bali for a bit of R&R. I stayed in the swanky side at Nusa Dua. And I was there for like one night, and I said, no, this isn't the way to do this. So I left and I went down to Seminyak and to other areas. I stayed in a place that was $30 a night, and it was just like shared housing. And I just started walking the streets, and I decided to go and visit some orphanages with the pure intention that I had money in my pocket that I was just going to donate. And as I started meeting with these orphanages, I met with 5. I went to a Hindu orphanage, I went to a Muslim orphanage, a couple of Christian orphanages, and I started to see that the money that they were raising was very much put to the schooling of the older children. And I noticed that the younger children weren't getting anything. So I thought, okay, this is interesting. And then this pattern just started to come. And as I started asking and inquiring, they were getting just, if you had turned up and read them a book, and same with myself, that's all they were getting. So then I started doing a lot more investigation around the levels of poverty, literacy. I think Indonesia's ranked 60th out of 61 countries for literacy. Wow. Not that they would necessarily probably promote that, but then when I looked at government reports, if I look at the sort of information, it's very much about literacy of older children. And I think the challenges are that there are families getting broken up, because in other islands around Indonesia, they're now sending their children to Bali and Jakarta orphanages because they know that there's a fund base for the children to get education that they can't provide. So we're actually getting this situation now where families are getting broken up just purely because they want them to have an education, but they're sending them offshore. And they may not go back, or they may go back later on. So that sort of led me to think, okay, what can we do about this? So we've done a lot of work. It's sort of taken us 2 years to get to the point that where we're at now, where we're looking more at a decentralized model. So we want to be able to help both the individual children and build the kindergarten age children knowledge and education. and give them an ability to be able to understand what's right and wrong, and to give them a start in life that they just don't get today. Plus, then looking at how we can educate and grow the communities. So by having a teaching program, so instead of having a school where everyone comes, we're actually going to go out and actually bring the teachers and educate the teachers in the communities and build it from that way. That way we keep children with their families, as well as give them a great start in life. So, yeah.
So following that walk down, visiting those orphanages, what did you then decide to do, and where did?
Yeah, so I created a foundation called Dreams for Life. Through that journey, I actually met my fiance, IU, and it was quite strange. Very funny story that so she was connected with me on Facebook through, I think, Indonesian friends who had come into the community as we were sort of starting, and I saw this video, and it was actually of her and her daughter in a book fair in Jakarta. And I just messaged her and I said, I'm looking for books for children. Are there cheap books here, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So she replied, I'm with my daughter, I'll answer you later. And about 4 weeks later, she answered me and she said, hey, yeah, it's actually a book fair. They have them all the time, blah, 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 blah. So that's how we sort of connected. And then I was going to Jakarta on business. And I said to her, I'm going to be in town. I'd like to talk to you about that. And she shared with me that she wanted to build a school for children as part of, a goal of hers. So that's how we really connected. So we have very much a common thought and idea around how we could help the children. So we created Dreams for Life, and we've just established that. It's called Yayasan Impian Kehidupan in Indonesia, and Yayasan meaning foundation. And we're now going through the process of establishing that in Australia as well. So the goal of the two being sharing, the models that we're doing from an Indonesian and teaching perspective, and now starting to also impact communities in Australia. So when I started researching Australia, I could see that there were like 700,000 children without an education, which blew me away. I mean, if I look at, the numbers of Indonesian population and to Australia, it's actually quite similar from a percentage perspective. So I think there's an Indigenous component to that, which I think is really important. And we think that the model of us finding those communities who, of course, want to also participate, but we think that model of going and helping and guiding them is a far better model because of the geography. Getting people to a centralised point is difficult. So that's going to be a really key focus as well, to roll that out across Australia and also into communities. There's not as much of an orphanage community here as there is in Indonesia, but we're looking at it more as, a community in need type of process, yeah.
And so you do this project alongside your full-time job?
I do.
At I believe at Palo Alto?
Palo Alto Networks, yeah. So, it's I don't know, I don't feel it's like a challenge, sort of by day I'm helping people and enabling people as a coach, and then in the evenings and weekends, I'm building what I think is my end game, which is, if we can just make the difference in the life of one child, 2, 10, 100, that's just, so empowering to be able to do that. So I think it's a natural extension for me to be able to do that, based on, where my career's taken me.
I mean, you said you left behind your aspiration for yourself, but there must be an aspiration. What's your aspiration sort of for the next 5 to 10 years? I
would love us to, I'd love us to eliminate poverty, but we've had politicians who have claimed that as well.
Yes.
So I'm not going to say eliminate, but I would love to have a massive dent, a massive impact, positive impact in reducing poverty, using education as a vehicle. It's interesting being involved in this sort of inclusion diversity approach, which is definitely something that we will have as an ethos in Dreams for Life. But I think having that same approach with all of our people, if we can have, yourself, Di, and other people that are associated with us thinking the same way, then we're going to get greater communication, greater learning, greater awareness of where we need to help people, and give them those chances and those opportunities. Yeah.
So where to next now for you, for both in your business, professional? You've now got kind of in the process of getting Dreams for Life set up here in Australia. Do you see yourself coming back to Australia, or are you going to be based in Asia?
So I've had this discussion quite often, but I see myself between Australia and Indonesia, just because of the nature of what I do. My day job takes me all over Asia. So it's a bit of an open book, to be honest. I've said to, I think, my family a number of times, I'll be back next year, and then something else has changed. I think for me, I can't start something, unless it gets totally shut off from me. I just can't start it and stop it, and this is just too important. So it's a little bit wherever it takes me. I do want to really have an impact in Australia, as much as we do in Indonesia. But Australia is my hometown, and I have a real passion for, again, that voice. Whether it's a multicultural audience, whether it's the Indigenous population, I think there is so much potential there. And now it's interesting how my worlds converge. If I look at Palo Alto Networks and inclusion and diversity, my job as a coach, I get exposed to all these people. I get to see them who they are, see their potential, and work with even their managers to identify, I'm seeing this, why don't you try this? And almost be a guide, in brokering those progressions in human performance. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you very much, Di. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. So that's, thank you for being with us here at Dawncast Podcast. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on this hashtag below. And if you have any comments, any questions, please do, go to that link. See you next time. Well, did you enjoy that episode of Dawncast? Well, I hope you did. At Dawn, the difference is you. So hit the subscribe button below and leave a comment and tell us what you would like to hear more of in the future.